everybody. Welcome. Hi. Another compelling episode of Black Beat Podcast. Hi, I'm John Washington, your CEO and editor in chief of Flossin Media. Today we have an extraordinary guest joining us alongside my co host, Fawn Aberson, the managing editor of Flossin Media, and Michelle Guerrera, our senior editor. We're thrilled to welcome Dr. Melinda Abdullah.
Melina.
Melina Abdullah, am I pronouncing your last name Abdullah correctly?
Yes, Melina Abdullah. That's
Melina, welcome here. Dr. Abdullah is not just a distinguished academic, but she is a formidable force in civic leadership and activism. Michelle?
Yeah, as the former chair of the Department of Pan African Studies at California State University, Los Angeles, she has dedicated her career to education and activism. She co founded the Los Angeles chapter of Black Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter Grassroots, where she continues to serve as co director. In an exciting turn of events, Dr. Abdullah has been announced as the running mate for Dr. Cornel West on the independent ticket for the 2024 presidential election. With a rich background in social justice, academic excellence, and grassroots activism, Dr. Abdullah is poised to bring transformative change to our political landscape. Dr. Abdullah, thank you so much for being with us today. We're honored to have you on the show.
Yes, sister. Thank you very much. Again, we welcome you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, folks, let's dive right on into this. So, Dr. Abdullah, as a co-founder of the Los Angeles chapter of the Black Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter Grassroots, what inspired you to start this movement, and what are some of the key achievements you're most proud of, sister? Sure. Black Lives Matter really was born out of protest. So I was one of the original members of Black Lives Matter. It was kind of born around me and through the community that I was a part of on July 13th, 2013. Um, that was the day that George Zimmerman was acquitted in the murder of Trayvon Martin. Many of us, I was one of them, rose up and said they cannot simply continue to steal the lives of our sons, our collective sons and daughters and people, and it go unanswered. And so I, like many folks, went out and was part of massive protests in Los Angeles in an area called Leimert Park, which we call Africatown. And I was with some of my friends that we dubbed ourselves the Mama Brigade. We brought our own children out there. And I also called out the students that I worked with. Again, I teach in Pan African Studies at Cal State LA. And for 3 days, we protested. But on that third day of protest, we were called together by one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter, Patrice Cullors, who summoned us to her Black artist community where she was living at the time. And we had our first meeting. That was the third day of protest. We had our first meeting that night. And we pledged to build a movement, not a moment, because we knew that although many of us had been involved in the struggle against police brutality for years, in struggles for justice for Oscar Grant and Margaret Mitchell and Amadou Diallo and so many others, that this would keep happening unless we began to address the systems that put targets on the backs of Black people. And so that's what Black Lives Matter was born to be. And I think even as we took that pledge, we didn't know how our lives would be transformed. We didn't know what it meant to commit your life to movement, but I'm very, very grateful that I believe God called me into this work and gave me purpose, affirmed the purpose of my life in fighting for the liberation and freedom of Black people. Right on. So appreciative of your contribution, Doctor. I am really grateful for your contribution in relationship to Black Lives Matter. Your work often intersects academic and activism. How do you balance these roles? Activism and how do I balance? Yeah, yes. How do you academia in your
Academia
activity?
and
Yes, uh huh.
activism. So I'm grateful that I teach Pan African Studies, and it's one of the ethnic studies disciplines. It's actually, if I talk too long about Black studies or Pan African Studies or Africana Studies, we use many different names. I'll become emotional because I went to the only high school in the country at the time that had a Black Studies department. My department chair and teacher was someone named Mr. Richard Navies. And for me, who came of age in the early 90s, Black Studies really saved my life. It connected school to who I was, right? It made me, even though I would get in lots of trouble and not be a stellar student in high school, it planted seeds that allowed me to kind of grow and then go on to college and major in African American studies at Howard University. And I'm saying all that to say that the reason that it resonated for me, the reason that I connected with Black Studies is because Black Studies isn't just about knowing information. It's about when I chaired our department, the Pan African Studies department at Cal State LA, we came up with the motto that we are the intellectual arm of the revolution. Mm-hmm. And what that means is we're not just learning information so that we can know it. We're learning information and developing our intellectual tools and skills so we can transform the world. It should be part of revolution. So for me, as both an organizer and an intellectual, those two things go together. The work that I do as an intellectual has to inform the work that we do on the ground, and then the work that we do on the ground has to inform our intellectual work. So I kind of don't see them as two different spaces. I see them as the same space with the same goal, with the same vision. And so that's the only way I think that we can balance the two, because the two have to be kind of unified and part of a same vision and trajectory.
So you've been described as a womanist scholar activist. What does this mean? This is the first time I've seen that phrase. And so
I
just
describe
what does that mean to
myself
you?
as a womanist scholar activist.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so I'm a womanist. I'm a womanist in the way that Alice Walker defines womanism, right? I understand that who I am as a Black woman and a Black mother and a Black daughter and granddaughter, all exist in the same body and spirit, that fighting for who I am has to be done holistically. Fighting for who my children and who my community are has to be done holistically. And so, I'm glad you actually asked that, because this morning I was reflecting on, I don't know why I wake up with random thoughts, right? But I woke up and I was thinking about the book, Their Eyes Were Watching God. And I don't know why I was thinking about it, but I was thinking about Janie and Tea Cake, right? That part of the novel. And then I thought about Alice Walker's poem for Janie Crawford. I don't know if you're familiar with the poem for Janie Crawford, but Alice Walker wrote this poem where she says, I love the way Janie left her husband's, the one who tried to turn her into a mule, and the other who tried to interest her in becoming a queen. A Black woman, unless she submits, she just said woman, but she meant Black woman. A Black woman, unless she submits, is neither a mule nor a queen, though like a mule she may suffer and a queen pace the floor. And so to be a womanist means summoning my own, calling forth my own Janie Crawford, right? Remembering that there is suffering and there could even be pacing the floor, but we're more than that. And so I'm a womanist scholar activist, like prayerfully, like the womanists before me. And that means using every tool in my toolbox to work towards liberation. And it means defining myself and being unapologetic about that.
Oh man.
Well, thank you very much for that, for sure.
Yeah, Dr. Abdullah, so along that line, I think a lot of us struggle with speaking truth to power, right? Because we can be ostracized, we can be victimized, we can be villainized, all that kind of stuff. What propels you to be able to speak your truth, regardless of the circumstances, I guess, sometimes?
So before we came on air, one of the things we talked about, Vaughn, is that I just took my children, my middle child, to visit a couple of schools, right? So we went to Texas Southern University, we went to Prairie View, A&M, and then we went to Southern University in Baton Rouge. And what I didn't say is in between those visits, we stopped in Beaumont, Texas, which is where my people are from and where my family still lives, my extended family still lives. And while we were there, I was thinking about my grandmother. We call her Grandma Mac, right? Who graduated from Prairie View in 1932. And what I told my middle child, Amara, who has a big mouth on her, is that she got it honestly because I got a big mouth on me. And I got it honestly because my mama has one and my grandma has one, right? That I come from a line of loudmouth Black women. And what you call speaking truth to power means just not being quiet about our suffering or about our vision or about what we want or what we need. And I'm grateful to descend from such a line of Black women that speak up. And that means speaking truth to power. It means laughing when we need to laugh. It means standing up for ourselves. And so that's where it comes from. It doesn't come from book learning. It comes from being true and doing what I can to honor my mother and my grandmother, my great grandmothers, and all the women before me.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, that because their names where I come from, Ann and Viola. If it was anybody, even when we was growing up in the project, most of them women was activists. I mean, they were serious about keeping it down and holding it down, and they wasn't joking neither. Because I still remember Ann saying, "Boy, you better sit your ass down." And then even the people that would come around there, any of the white people that come to the project, whatever, my mother would be right there defending us and standing, whatever the power might have been, she was in the front, you know. But let's shift gears just a little bit. Let's talk about this political thing here. Congratulations also on, your selection to be Dr. Cornell's vice president. But give me a little bit of motive. What was your motivation about joining the independent ticket and getting involved in? What was your primary goals? What were you trying to achieve, and what were you thinking about achieving when you made that decision?
So one, I think it's a decision I never, 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 ever, ever thought I would have to make. I never planned to ever run for political office. So as you talk about Miss Ann and Miss Viola,
Yeah, my
as
grandma.
I think about my own grandmothers, as I think about we in our neighborhood, her name was Miss Rose.
Mm.
Miss Rose was the one who, if she caught you messing up, she would snatch you up and give you a little something, and then she would tell your mother.
Yeah, you get a neighborhood whooping.
Right.
Yeah.
So I thought that that's the legacy that I do inherit that legacy. I inherit that legacy. And I thought I would never run for office because I don't want to abandon that legacy. One thing that Miss Rose never did and my mother never did, but I do, is I cuss a lot, right? And I thought that's not, the way that candidates speak. But I'm not gonna, if my mom can't stop me from cussing, then I'm not going to stop cussing because I'm running for office, right?
Yeah.
So I just thought I would never run for office. And then Dr. West announced his candidacy for president. And I was deeply inspired. I've always been inspired by his intellectual work. Began following him when I was an undergrad at Howard. And then as I moved in the discipline, of course, love the way he interpreted even safe things like Dr. King and wrote about the radical king. I loved the way that he challenged the notion of black faces in high places. And even though it got him some heat when he criticized and critiqued President Obama, it needed to be said. And so he's been deeply inspirational for me. And so I was content to be an ardent supporter of his, to be an enthusiastic supporter. And sometimes I was invited to introduce him in spaces. Sometimes my children were on panels with him. And that felt good to me. And that's what I thought it was going to be until one day he and his wife called me. And I thought they were calling to debrief. I host a radio program here. Debrief the radio program that I just interviewed him on. But instead, they called and asked me to be his running mate. And my heart danced out of my chest, and I wanted to say yes, but then I had to go back and ask my kids and ask my mama and ask my baba and ask my organizing family. And we all said yes because we felt like this is an opportunity. The first Black woman to run for vice president of the United States, her name was Charlotta Bass, and she ran in 1952 on the Progressive Party ticket. And she said, win or lose, we win by raising the issues. So as an organizer with Black Lives Matter grassroots, this was an opportunity for us to lift up what freedom looks like for Black people in our estimation, why we call ourselves Harriet Tubman abolitionists, that we don't believe in tinkering around the edges of policing or prisons. We believe in upending them, and we believe in building real systems of safety instead. And so for me, the decision was made because we think that the world deserves to think beyond the Democratic and Republican parties that kind of box us into these options that aren't really options that lead us to freedom for Black people, Indigenous people, brown people, poor people. We're not led to freedom by the options that they give us. And so I feel very grateful and humbled to have an opportunity to raise other possibilities alongside Dr. West.
Right on.
Yeah, Dr. Abdulah, so speaking of the current political machine, you're right, it's Democrat and Republicans, they're the dominant party. And, just even in the debate, do you feel like the American people are really getting a fair shakedown on the issues? Are you getting enough megaphones out there? I know the media systems out there often block out third-party candidates. How are you dealing with that? And how are you trying to break those constructs of media polarization?
So nothing could have prepared me for this. My PhD is actually in political science, so you would think I would know how this works. And I had no idea. I had no idea that this two-party system, this duopoly, worked so intently to block out other voices. And like you say, it's not just in terms of what we call ballot access, getting us on the ballot in all 50 states, which is a major task and undertaking, and a near impossibility for any third party candidate to get on the ballot in all 50 states. But it's also allowing our voices to come through. I didn't realize that mainstream media spent so much time trying to box out other candidates, right? That as they talk about elections, they almost never talk with people like Dr. West, right? They almost never allow us space to talk about, as the Democratic Party shifts its strategy and has a new presumptive nominee, they're not checking in with other campaigns or saying, well, how would you push Kamala Harris towards a policy agenda. Instead, they're getting kind of caught up in this cultural piece, which won't have the impact on the ground that we really needed to have. And so I was not prepared for the degree of real stifling of our voices. And so it's why we're grateful for independent media, and the way that media has become, alternative media has become democratized through technology, that's how we get our voices out, because the corporate owned media is not going to allow us entry.
You know, I'm glad you said that in your answer, because that was part of my question is how would, if you did have an opportunity to speak to Kamala Harris, how would you, what kind of debate would you have with her? How would you challenge her policies, or try to get to influence her policies? What would one that really would stand out for you?
Well, I've been listening to a lot of her interviews, and there's a couple of policies that are really troublesome for me. One, her refusal to pull back our tax dollars from the state of Israel, which is committing the worst genocide in global history, right? And we're financing it with our tax dollars, tax dollars that could be used to house our people, could be used to make sure everybody had enough to eat and was educated and had all of the things that we need, right? We know that 62% out of every federal dollar is going to military, when for just a small fraction of that, we could have healthcare for all, something that she said she doesn't believe in. Just a couple days ago, she said she does not believe in Medicare for all, right? So I would challenge her on that. I would challenge her on, if she's not a ceasefire candidate, I think that should be our line in the sand. If you are not only speaking to, but financing war, financing genocide, and I guess that's the better way of terming it. If you are financing genocide, that shouldn't be an option for us. I also think that it's really problematic that Kamala Harris has been very clear that she does not support reparations. And I think that as somebody who studied international law in graduate school, we know reparations is a basic premise, a basic practice of international law. When people are harmed, there needs to be steps taken to repair those damages. When you talk about generations of labor and life stolen from Black people, and you're not willing to repair that damage, you're not willing to even consider making reparations, I think that's a huge issue. And then, when we talk about workers' rights, we know that all the labor unions are lined up behind the Democratic Party. But we need to remember that we also need to have a livable wage, and that for Dr. West and I, we did some study, and we understand that the minimum wage that we should have in this country, and other states like mine in California should be higher, but a federal minimum wage needs to be at least $27 an hour. And that's not something that either the Democrats or Republicans are willing to consider. And they're not fighting hard enough for other easy stuff like diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Or ethnic studies, or any of these things. And so I would push her on pretty much every issue that's not just a cultural issue. And I know that they've tried to push us into being so afraid of Donald Trump, who absolutely is the embodiment of evil. And Project 2025, which is absolutely a horrible document.
I've been hearing about that document, and I'm really it's really delightful to hear you actually call that beast a beast.
Right.
Very few people in the open market, especially us, will actually call that monster what that monster looked like, and and it's ominous, it's scary. And so as I'm listening to you talk, Doctor, I'm curious as to how are you going to address some of the apathy in terms of our community? The brown and the black demographics that have, this marginal, this voting ethic or this value around voting. How do you plan to communicate and organize those demographics to come out and vote?
Sure. So one, I wanna just kind of clarify a little bit that Black people are actually one of the most reliable voting blocks in this entire country, right? So this notion that Black people don't vote, but also the responsibility that especially the Democratic Party has put on Black voters is misplaced, right? We have to remember that all the advancements that we've seen have been because Black people vote for everything, and the most reliable group of voters within that demographic is actually Black women, right?
Yeah.
So we do vote in huge numbers, but the Black people who don't vote and the people who don't vote, but especially the Black people who don't vote or don't plan to vote, I actually don't think it's apathy. So I have two children who will vote for the first time in a presidential election this time, right? So my oldest is 20 and my middle is 17, but she'll be 18 by the time November comes. And neither of them planned to vote for either Donald Trump or then Joe Biden, right? They called him Genocide Joe.
Yeah.
But they didn't plan to vote not because they're apathetic, but because they didn't agree with the options, right? They didn't agree with them. So for them, it was a political calculation that I'm not going to vote for the lesser of two evils. Voting for the lesser of two evils is still evil. And so I think that what Dr. West and I offer is an opportunity to vote for someone, right? Do you believe in a $27 an hour minimum wage? We give you something to vote for. Do you believe in not just Medicare for all, but healthcare justice, which addresses things like Black mother mortality? Then vote for us, right? Do you believe in gender justice that doesn't just say we should enshrine the right to decide, the freedom of choice over your own body, but also says that when you talk about gender justice, you're not just talking about abortion rights, but we're talking about the right to have children as well, right? So many of the women who feel like they have to have an abortion, it's because it's also coupled with economic factors, right? Where we don't provide for people. There's no paid medical leave, paid parental leave, right? And then even things like when we talk about gender justice, and I'm deeply inspired by young people like my oldest Tandiwe, and then some people like her friends in Operation Period who say, listen, gender justice isn't about just abortion rights or the rights to have children or the right to parental leave. It's also about basic things like if men had periods every month, there would be free period products. And that should be a part of our agenda. Free period products.
Well, I think we do have them once a month. We just ain't got a product for 'em. you know, sister, you're delightful. I really do enjoy hearing your disposition on some of these topics and these issues. But I was reading a little something from my editor, and she was telling me a little bit about your background. Your background is incredibly rich with influences from your union organizing father, your Marxist economist grandfather, in your own academic journeys. How have these things influenced and shaped your worldview and your approach to activism?
Well, a lot of people attribute a lot to my biological father or to my grandfather, who he was part of the opposition to in Nazi Germany, right? He was part of actually global organizing around that, and then became a very well-known economist. And I am grateful that I come from that, but I also want to uplift that I was raised by my mother, who was a Black woman from the South, who was part of the survival programs of the Black Panther Party which didn't always seem political, but it was political. That when my single mother single school teacher mother hit the block after teaching all day in an elementary school, that the kids in my neighborhood in East Oakland would run to my front porch and yell time for school.
Mm.
And my mother would sit there and read to them until the sun went down and teach them to read until the sun went down. So as much as people like to say that it's because of my father or my grandfather, I think my mother deserves much more credit. And I think that that's sometimes what happens when we talk about the ways in which Black women organize. It gets erased as just something that's not political. And so, again, I don't want to minimize the role that my grandfather and biological father may have played. My father definitely gets credit for me being a unionized worker and setting an example of how important labor unions are. But it's my mother who raised me with the ethic that I think is really the most important in terms of political organizing.
Cool, cool. So how? What are you thinking from? So yeah, so I know that male, female. She was bringing to a point a very similar thing I also do when celebrating as being a former athlete and all that, and everybody would always go stand up in front and go, well, I give grace to my mama, but but I was standing up as a giving grace to my daddy because he was very instrumental in my life and that support of reality. So, but as you grew up in some of the richest places, in East Oakland and in Los Angeles, how have these things and your participation with these communities influenced your work in the way you do social justice these days?
Well, East Oakland, and I grew up in an area of East Oakland that we call Funktown, and my brother and I still laugh about they don't understand what kind of Black people we're talking about. We didn't come from so there's a lot of parallels between Kamala Harris and me, right?
Okay.
Tell me.
We're both from Oakland. We both went to Howard, and we both pledged the same sorority.
Wow,
Alpha Kappa.
wow, that's something else there. I never knew.
Yeah, different. She's a little ahead of me. Different times, but
Interesting. Yeah.
I think the neighborhood is so important, right? I didn't come from the same, and maybe this is, you got me thinking and talking at the same time, which is not necessarily a good idea.
You be all
But it's
right.
that intersection that was brought up earlier, right? That my class identity, I don't come from North Oakland or the Oakland Hills,
Mhm.
right? I come from an area called Funktown, which is, poor and working class people. And for me, it means always moving from that space, always moving from a space that doesn't seek to just get in the door. I think a lot of middle class Black folks get brainwashed into believing that when they do well, that's good enough, right? But I think in working class and poor communities, we know that, dang, I wish I could quote Jay-Z, that we're not doing well unless everybody's doing well with us, right? And so I think that has informed the way that I move. That it's important to not just get ahead for myself, and I don't want to be martyred. I don't want to make it seem like I've taken, I want to martyr myself, but so I want to be okay for myself and my children. But really, I have no desire to advance myself individually. That really living in purpose and even living in joy means having a world where we all get all of what we need and most of what we want.
Wow.
Can you talk about, maybe I think what we've all been experiencing here is John often uses the word spiritual deprivation. There seems to be a lack of hope in a lot of folks. And I appreciate your conversation about maybe it's not apathetic, but a lack of choice. How would you lead from the core of spirituality if you were elected vice president?
Right. Well, spirit is at the center of my life. And so Dr. West is in the radical Christian tradition, right? In the recognizing that Jesus was a revolutionary. I practice Islam, so I'm Muslim. In fact, I'm the first Muslim candidate on any presidential ticket. And I think faith is what roots us. Faith is what enables us to not just say, well, what's strategic or pragmatic, but what's right. And it doesn't mean that I want to impose my faith or he wants to impose his faith on anybody else. But I think having a spiritual center allows us to connect with the part of self that's also connected with every other self in the entire universe. I hope that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. Very much. I think. Go ahead,
Yes,
Michelle.
go ahead, Michelle.
I wanted to know how you plan to move forward regardless of the outcome of the election. Like, how do you see that informing, post-election? Like, what is your trajectory regardless of the outcome?
Post-election and mid-election, right? During this whole season, we are using this as an opportunity to lift up really core beliefs and knowings that have to move whether we're elected or not elected, right? That we have to be talking about. I know on Sunday there was a National Day of Mourning for Sonia Massey, who was the Black mother who was killed by sheriffs when she called 911 for help with a suspected prowler. And that sheriff's deputy this was his sixth job as a cop in 4 years, right? He's suspected of being a part of white supremacist groups. He was dishonorably discharged from the military. That we know that as we say names like Sonia Massey, we also remember that while we're lifting her up as an individual and acknowledging that her teenage children, some people heard her son Malachi speak publicly for the first time last week, they miss their mama.
Oh, yeah.
And in December, a Black woman named Niani Finlayson was killed by a sheriff's deputy here in Los Angeles. She just called 911 for help with a domestic dispute. And this cop, Ty Shelton, shot her dead in a matter of seconds in front of her 9-year-old daughter, Zaisha. Mm-hmm. And so, as we say Sonia Massey, we can't say it without saying Niani Finlayson. We can't say it without saying Corinne Gaines, who was murdered in Baltimore with her 5-year-old son sitting on her lap. We can't say it without saying Megan Hockaday, who was killed during a domestic disturbance by police also in California. And so this campaign is about lifting those names, and it's about moving in such a way that people understand that we do have the power to make political choices that invest in the mental health of Sonia Massey, that invest in community responders when there are perceived crises, that invest in making sure that children are well cared for. And so this campaign is about doing that now, but also moving that forward post-election. And so I promised my organizing family that I'll never step back from the formation that I'm a part of is Black Lives Matter Grassroots, which is 39 chapters all around the country. Black Lives Matter chapters all around the country. And when we finish in November, we still have that. In fact, that's growing. Black Lives Matter Grassroots is growing. And the goal is to get people to understand that elections matter, but organizing matters more.
Wow. Doctor, I am so grateful. I sit here and I listen to you, sister, and I wish you all the luck in the world about this with this agenda, and somehow or another making sure that your voice or the voice of you and Dr. Cornell, Dr. West, that you guys have the opportunity to be able to share your views with the rest of the world. And how are the rest around the country? Are you guys getting on any of the other platforms, and are they allowing you guys access to any of these debates or these things as it's moving forward? What is that looking like as you're moving forward?
No, they are not. So in short, no, they're not
Mm.
letting us on any debate platforms. And so we have to make our own way, right?
Yeah.
We have to use the media that we have. We're grateful that, different platforms, again, independent media has been hugely important. Black journalists, when they're not inviting Donald Trump to come speak at their
Yeah, that was some crazy
conferences,
stuff on
right?
there.
I don't know if you all know that NABJ, National Association of Black
Yeah.
Journalists, actually had Donald Trump at their conference, which is appalling.
Right.
But when they're not doing that, the individual members of National Association of Black Journalists have been really, really supportive and opened up their platforms, as well as, have been writing about the campaigns. Influencers on social media have been helpful. But more than that, I think it's a word of mouth, people powered campaign. And so, I recently, my cousin sent me a video with Eddie Griffin, the comedian Eddie Griffin. And Eddie Griffin was like, he was talking about how at the time it was Biden, how he didn't like Biden or Trump. And then the next show he did on his platform, he was like, I didn't know that Cornel West was running for president. How did I not know Cornel West was running for president? And that was because regular folks like my cousin Dave were up in the comments saying, if you don't like them, check out Cornel West,
Yeah.
right? And so it's been different platforms, but it's been also regular people utilizing things that sound very rudimentary, like comment sections, to raise the campaign. And I think it's a beautiful way of organizing.
May I ask, beyond your candidacy, yours and Dr. West's candidacy, which I wholeheartedly support and have been promoting in every way I can, what hope do you see, hopeful momentum, like within the entire process, given what we're faced with and who the Democrats and Republicans have chosen to lead the charge? What do you see as some hopeful momentum amongst the people?
Well, now I'm thinking about Dr. West's book, Hope on a Tightrope. I think people become hopeful, and I become hopeful when we step out of the realm of what is and imagine what can be when we work for it. That gives me great hope. The young people who've been inspired by this campaign give me tremendous hope. The energy of a room, if you go into any room that we're hosting, that gives me great hope. A room that's filled with music and laughter and ideas and warm embraces. And I know I tend to, again, I said I come from a long line of loudmouth Black women, and we're also all educators, so we talk a lot. And I'm just going to offer one quick story if I can. And that's, we had something called a grassroots fundraiser in Oakland. And actually, we did 2 back-to-back events. First, a community conversation at this bookstore, this new bookstore bar in Oakland that was filled, overflowing with more than 300 people in a space that's set up for 100. And then we moved over to a fundraiser that was at my cousin Dave's barbershop. That gives me hope that when you looked around the room, we had everybody from City Council member Carol Fife to the leader of the Nation of Islam, to Nation of Islam in the area that minister, to kids, to readers who haven't read anything since they read Race Matters, right? And that it's overflowing with people who have ideas and new imaginings. And just a quick follow up after that, I got back to Los Angeles. And as I was walking my neighborhood and I was going door to door, actually trying to get people to re register under our new political party, the Justice for All Party, I ran into this young brother who was 21. I know that because he told me. And he asked me, he told me he was from Oakland, asked me about the campaign. And it turns out that one of the people who was in the room, who actually led our security team there, was somebody who trained him and reared him as a young boy. That gives me hope that you have this range of people who feel like politics has nothing for them. Investing in electoral politics is one piece of an equation in a movement moment.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
As we come to an end of this show, usually, and you being in the business, sometimes I go through and when I'm on the other side of the table, I usually get away from there and I reflect. Well, man, there was something I should have dropped while I was on that platform at that time. At this point in time, as we come to a conclusion, is there anything that is circling in the back of your head that you would like to let our listeners and viewers know about, and that you would like to share to the listening population at this point before we conclude?
Yeah, I just want to say that we do have an opportunity with this election to break out of the notion that we have to vote for the lesser of two evils. And I know as people get excited about Kamala Harris, there's all this talk about she got a good silk press, or some of the young people like her laugh. Well, we need more than a good silk press and a hearty laugh to lead the vision for this country. And I want to encourage people to not be, and this is what I started to say about Project 2025 and the evil Trump agenda, is we need to break out of the idea that we should be paralyzed by fear and be forced into voting for, again, someone who is still the lesser of two evils, even if they're in a better package. We have an opportunity with this election to vote our vision, not our fears. Vote our vision, not our fears. And I hope people will invest in our campaign. I hope they'll also understand that this is a collective campaign. And I encourage everybody to jump in it with everything you can, whether it's hopping in the comments or donating or volunteering or sending us your ideas, that this is a collective campaign.
Thank you very much, sister. And this concludes this episode of Blackbeard Podcast. Hey, Dr. Abdulah, listen, sister, you've just blown us away today, and we do appreciate you sharing with us some of your insights and views on this political matter, because politics matter. And regardless if we want to believe that they do it or not, and for a long time as a young man, I didn't think they did. All the way up until the time that my father told me, look here, boy, if you're just standing on the sideline, that's all you're doing. But you got to get into the game every once in a while and share the things and participate with the things that matter. And so I do appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing with us some of your insights and some of your views about this. And for me, I want to see y'all do this. I really do. It's outside. It's given me a little bit of faith and hope that there are other things that I can invest my time, energy, emotions, spirit, and money in. And so I do appreciate you coming on the show today. You ladies want to take it out, or what you guys thinking?
Thank you so much for joining the podcast and accepting our invitation. It's truly been an honor. And we also look forward to seeing you in the pages of our upcoming magazine as our op-ed contributor.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Dr. Abdulah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I've loved this conversation. I really appreciate y'all.
Respect to you, sister. And again, hey, but before we check out, who was it down there in Oakland? I remember listening to an interview the Black Lives Matter interview, and sister who was the president, the head of Black Lives Matter down in Oakland. I don't know if it was you. In the commentary, had asked, well, if you had a bag of reparations, if you had a bag to put reparations, what would be the first item you would put in that bag? Was it you that answered that question, or was it someone else that? And she said that I would put an unlimited mental health card in the bag. Would be the first, for, a card that would allow the demographic to have unlimited access to mental health services. And I was so supportive of that. And I said, yeah, here.
But look, in my bag, it was a check first.
Profound
Yeah,
thing,
no, it
yeah.
might have been Alicia Garza, maybe
Yeah.
Alicia Garza or Kat Brooks, maybe.
Yeah, I was really impressed with that statement. But anyway, sister, it was a pleasure interacting with you, and I look forward to doing that again also. And thank you again.
Thank you all.
Yes.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.